Shields up, Ironbreakers, and welcome back to Monster Hunter Wilds. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the performance in the Monster Hunter Wilds beta based on my experience with it on PlayStation 5 as well as two different PC configurations. This has been a bit of a hot topic within the Monster Hunter community, and hopefully this video can shed some light on the situation. So let's get things started by talking about the PlayStation 5 version, as that was the one that was available the soonest through PlayStation Plus. So I jumped into the game, and very quickly, because the main menu gave us the option to, I booted up in frame rate mode because I wanted to see what the game played like with an increased frame rate, and especially because I had already played an earlier version of this build when I went to Gamescom in August. So I was like, alright, I already played like the kind of like the slower version of this build, so let's go ahead and see what we're working with when it comes to frame rate. Now, one of the spots that the game struggles with is going to be camp, and that is because the game is actually loading 15 other hunters in addition to your own. Now, I've seen a couple of misconceptions when it comes to the multiplayer of Monster Hunter Wilds, as a lot of people were reporting that like, oh, I'm loading in 100 other hunters. That is not the case. Even though you can have 100 people in your lobby, the game will only ever render 16 of those people, yourself included. So the game was struggling to render all of those hunters. Potentially sometimes they're sacreds, because if they were mounted on a sacred, it would render the sacred as well. And all of that stuff is going to be dynamic in the final version of the game, because sacreds will also include some form of customization and so on. And this is them kind of like testing out that system. So in camp, things were struggling. It was one of the spots where you actually had pretty poor performance. But what I decided to go with was to actually shoot footage of us hunting Radeon. And the reason I wanted to get footage of hunting Radeon is because I noticed that in the beginning portions of the Radeon hunt was it was a section that was particularly intense from a visual fidelity perspective, because you have clouds of dust coming in, you have lightning shooting in the background, you have the game doing the calculations for Radeon itself and all the animations he's doing, and at the same time you're going to have to perform with whatever weapon you happen to be playing with. So it's like, it's all well and good to test visual fidelity and even frame rate whenever you are at camp, but for my money, I'm like, no, I want to see a section that actually requires us to be playing the game, a section where you can actually judge whether or not the game is playable with inputs and proper weapon usage while all of this other stuff is happening in the map. There might even be a bunch of like herbivore creatures roaming around. There's going to be like reflections in the water and all that stuff. That's why most of the footage that you guys will be seeing in this video is going to be the early section of the Radeon hunt, because once Radeon moves over to the desert, things tend to get a little bit more performing, like good performance. You tend to get better there because it's a little bit more empty. And once he goes to his nest, which was a bit of a surprise to me, things also become a little bit better. And the reason it was a surprise is because the nest itself is like chock full of special effects and lightning stuff and whatnot, but it is a more secluded area, so I guess it makes a little bit of sense. So that's why we're going to be looking at a lot of Radeon footage. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Now, when it comes to the performance mode on PlayStation 5, just from looking at it, because I don't really have the tools that Digital Foundry has, so I don't actually know what the frame rate the game was running at from looking at a counter or something like that, but from looking at my eyes and from my experience and all of that stuff, I would estimate that we're getting anywhere from 40 FPS to 55 FPS average, and it is alternating between those, which means you get dips that go all the way down to 40, sometimes maybe even a little bit lower, but for the most part, the vibe that I got is that we're looking at north of 40 FPS, up to about 55. In some sections, I believe we were able to get 60 FPS, but that's what we had in terms of performance. On the other hand, in terms of visual fidelity, I do have to say I didn't feel like the game looked particularly appealing. The resolution, I'm not exactly sure what it was. If I had to estimate, I would imagine it was something lower than 800p, give or take. And I'm not exactly sure what that is going to be, because again, I don't have the tools of Digital Foundry. I don't know if they're going to be doing an analysis on this or not. If they have already done it, I haven't seen it yet. But these would be my estimates of what the game was running like in PlayStation 5 Performance Mode. Is it playable? Very much. Is it enjoyable? Very much. Is it perfect? And is it what we would expect in a final product? Absolutely not, and I will talk more about that at the end of the video. But that is the performance experience on PlayStation 5 in frame rate mode. So after that, I went in and I was like, okay, let's check out what resolution mode is looking like. And on resolution mode, the game is going to be targeting 30 FPS. For the most part, it seems to achieve those 30 FPS in a decent chunk of locations, but I would also have to say that during Radeon, I felt like it actually dipped below 30 FPS. And again, keep in mind that this is me just like, you know, looking at the frame rate from my experience playing video games for years and years and years. And that's kind of like just the overall feel that I got. It's like there were a couple of sections in there where I feel like it was a little bit lower, but generally it was definitely targeting 30 FPS. In terms of visual fidelity, I believe that the game was running at about 1440p. Again, I'd be very curious to see what Digital Foundry is going to be saying about this, but that is the overall vibe that I got. During Radeon, I definitely saw a couple of frame dips. In my opinion, I think the game looks really good on resolution mode for PlayStation 5, but again, you're looking at a 30 FPS target, which is not ideal for gameplay. The game was very much playable during the Radeon fight still. I was able to play the game both in frame rate as well as in resolution. Obviously, it was more responsive in the frame rate version of the beta, but, you know, the resolution version, like I said, also very much playable. If this was the only way to play Monster Hunter, I would have no beef about playing the game like this, because I still feel that Monster Hunter is such a unique experience. No other game is really doing what Monster Hunter is doing. So I will play it even if I have to play it at 30 FPS. I've played Generations Ultimate at 30 FPS. I've played a bunch of the 3DS games at 30 FPS. Hell, I played Try at like 480p or whatever it was back on the Wii days. Didn't like it much though back then, but that's another story. So anyway, I see a lot of people asking, oh, Rurikhan, what about the PlayStation 5 Pro? It was actually funny because during my live stream, I've had several people ask, hey, is this the base PlayStation 5 or the PlayStation 5 Pro? And at the time that we were doing the live stream, PlayStation 5 Pro wasn't even out yet. I'm not sure if it already came out or if it's coming out soon. I know that's at some point in early November that the PlayStation 5 Pro is supposed to release, but I don't have a PlayStation 5 Pro yet, so you know, it is what it is. Now, is the PlayStation 5 Pro going to make a significant difference in terms of the performance of Monster Hunter Wilds? First and foremost, I would like to remind people that we're talking about the Monster Hunter Wilds beta, not the final version of the game. And again, like I said, I will talk more about this a little bit further in the video. But I do believe that the PlayStation 5 Pro can get significant gains on here, especially if you assume that Capcom would be making use of the features of PlayStation 5 Pro. And it would make sense that they do, because I believe that Monster Hunter Wilds is a title that was developed with the PC in mind first. It is not a port, despite the fact that a lot of people are calling it a port for some strange reason. When Capcom already announced, it was either earlier, no, it was not earlier this year, it was at some point last year, Capcom announced that they were going to be, actually I don't even know if it was last year or if it was 2 years ago, but there was like a press release that they released where they said, we are going to be developing our titles on PC, and then we're going to be porting them to other platforms. We're going to have PC parity in terms of releases and all of that stuff. And at that point, I believe, is when Capcom started focusing on PC a little bit more, and then, you know, downscaling their games to work on consoles and so on and so forth. So if you have a situation like that, it means that the game is already prepared to take advantage of as much hardware power as it can, which means that if you give it more hardware power through PlayStation 5 Pro, likely the game's going to run better. And also the PlayStation 5 Pro is going to have the PSSR technology, which is their upscaling technology, that I'm going to assume is going to be able to get better results. Having said that, does that mean, yes, absolutely, go out and buy a PlayStation 5 Pro right now, just so that you can go play Monster Hunter Wilds? Absolutely not. I would not recommend that. What I would say is, like, if you're going to buy the PS5 Pro anyway, then sure, you're probably going to have a better experience. But I think that Capcom still has a lot of optimization work to do when it comes to the PlayStation 5 version of the game, and I think that they're going to be doing that work. And again, I know that I've said this a bunch of times already, but stick to the end of the video because I'm going to be talking way more about this specific topic and why, in my opinion, this is the performance that we're getting for the game. So anyway, that was the PlayStation 5 experience, and let's move on to the PC version. Now, we went for the PC version, and with PC, the configuration that we are using, because I mostly stayed in the office, so I don't have access to my beefier rig that I have at home. And my PC is running on a Ryzen 9 5900X processor at 3.7 gigahertz. It is running on a 6900 XT GPU. That is a Radeon. It's an AMD GPU. It's not an NVIDIA GPU, which I know a lot of people are probably more interested in NVIDIA performance. But the performance on NVIDIA was not terribly different for what I'm about to tell you, even though the performance was better on NVIDIA GPUs. It was not a perfect experience. But anyways, we have a 6900 XT. I believe it's got 16 gigs of VRAM. We have 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM at 4000 megahertz and an MSI M480 M2 NVMe drive. The reason all of these things are important is because all of these particular components contribute to the performance. I realize that a lot of people have this notion that, oh, so long as my GPU is good, nothing else matters. You are completely wrong. You also need a reasonably good CPU. The RE engine is very CPU intensive, and we definitely saw several reports throughout the beta period that a lot of people that were experiencing issues is because they had a budget GPU and then they paired that budget GPU like a 60 series GPU, whether that's a 3060 or a 2060 or something like that, and then they paired that with an even weaker CPU, and that caused a lot of issues. There were also a lot of configurations that actually had really good CPUs and really good GPUs, and people were still not getting good performance. So performance was quite a bit of a crapshoot across the Monster Hunter Wilds beta, and it is not something that I believe we can count on representing the final product. Now, the way that things worked out for PC is I started things off and we were running on AMD FSR at 4K, and things were holding, things were kind of like okay, but we weren't really reaching 60 FPS, and I was like, I want to push this a little bit more, so we're going to have to tweak a couple of these settings. So I started toying around with frame generation, and we were doing basically AMD FSR upscaled to 4K with frame generation. And I did not like that at all. Now, I haven't tested generation on 40 series GPU for NVIDIA because I don't own one. Hey, if anybody wants to give me a 40 series GPU, hey, I'm totally down to test all of this stuff. But guess what? You know, them GPUs are real expensive. So what I have is an AMD, all right? So we're testing out AMD FSR with frame generation. What I can tell you is that the frame generation for AMD was not a particularly good experience. The frame pacing was not that great, and on top of it, there was also the fact that there was like this ghosting artifacting around your character, which was very off-putting. So I played with it for like a hunt, and very quickly I was like, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. So the configuration that you guys are actually watching is not 4K AMD FSR, because I didn't record too much of that footage. I was basically focused on, look, I just want to get good footage, and the footage that I ended up using and the way that we ended up playing the game was native resolution. So we got rid of FSR. I was playing native resolution at 1440p in what I would consider to be medium settings. Not exactly what you would want for a 6900 XT, which is a GPU that is somewhat comparable to, say, like a 4070, give or take. It's not like a one-to-one comparison, but you guys get the idea. If you want to get a reference values, it would probably be close to a 4070. But yeah, I ended up playing at 1440p, and I thought game looks good at 1440p. I really like the visuals. The performance was anywhere from 50 FPS to like 60 FPS, give or take. Sometimes you would get a couple of dips, particularly, like I said, in the beginning portions of the Radeon fight, which is where stuff would really start to dip down, and in camp whenever you're rendering the other 15 hunters and all of that good stuff. So it was very playable. I enjoyed playing it. I really like the the overall gameplay experience, but performance, like I've been saying up until this point, is not really all there. Now, as a bit of a trivia, I got involved into a little bit of Twitter discourse because people would watch my live stream and they'd be like, I would like to know more about the performance because the game is completely unplayable on my 3060. There was a comment that said something along those lines. And I'm just like, I mean, we're playing a beta of a game that's coming out in 2025. expecting flawless performance out of a 3060 GPU without making any concessions, especially I don't even know what CPU you have paired with your budget 3060, I think is a little bit unreasonable. Now, I want to make sure that people understand that, like, I'm not saying that you just buy a better GPU or something like that, which some people were arguing that was my point. That's not my point. My point is, like, look, I've been gaming on PC since the 90s. And ever since we had the appearance of the Pentium processor, this is when I, got really into things. Because, I've been gaming on computers, but then, I was playing just a couple of games here and there. But then when the Pentium started appearing is when I really started getting into it. And I very quickly realized that it's like, okay, so the way this computer gaming thing's going to work is I'm going to have to update my computer like at least every 3 years or so. Otherwise, I'm looking at lowering settings, graphical settings on video games. That's the way that I started looking at things very early on, and that's the attitude that I've always taken. Now, does this mean that you can't play video games on budget GPUs? Absolutely not. And as a matter of fact, if it was up to me, I would love it if all games received more optimization for lower-end hardware. But the problem is, the optimization is the final stage of development of any video game. Like, I don't know how many people research into video game development and all of that stuff, but basically before the end stages, it's not even a game that is, playable. It's just a bunch of different things that a bunch of different people are working, and when they put it all together, that's when they can start optimizing, be like, okay, so in here we need to do this, so in there we need to do that, increase the visuals here, decrease the visuals there, whatever, there's a calculation mistake here. And that is when things really start getting together, is in the final months when they start doing QA and when they start doing the proper optimization of the game. And by the way, before we go any further, I want to make sure that people understand that this is from me doing research on Google. This is not something that anyone from the Capcom team told me that's how it works, okay? This is just me looking up generic information of how video development works. And I've saw tons of videos and tons of forum posts, so I'm not going to be able to just like, oh yeah, let me give you like 100 different sources for all this research that I've been doing over the last couple of months, right? But the conclusions that I've reached were those. Like, optimization is the final stage of video game development, and therefore, we're just not there yet. And if you are playing a beta of a video game, which is a completely different thing, if we look at a beta almost as developing a demo of a video game, again, from the research that I've done, this is something that on the AAA industry can last anywhere from 6 months to a year in terms of developing it. And the thing is, it's not as easy as, oh, we're going to grab the main game and we're going to lop off a piece of content and then we're going to release that. That's not how that works. They pick up an earlier version of the game and then they start optimizing that version of the game, because in that point you only have, like, it's a vertical slice. And then you have to optimize that. You have to put it together with the monsters that you're going to have and with the map that you have and the weapons and all that stuff. And then you have to, like, optimize that. And the biggest problem with optimizing betas like this one is that all of the time that you spend optimizing this beta is basically wasted when it comes to the main branch of the game, which is being developed separately. This is something that you can actually see in the Sakurai video, who, if you guys don't know, Sakurai is one of the main brains behind Smash Brothers. I mean, the guy behind Smash Brothers, essentially, from Nintendo. And he made a series of videos where he talks about development. And there's one very specific video that I would reference, which is whenever he talks about making a video game demo. And he explains this very well. He says, like, whenever you're making a demo, you're essentially developing two games. You're developing your main game, because you have to keep developing that one to reach deadlines and all that stuff. And you're developing the demo. And the demo itself needs to be QA'd separately from the main game in order to optimize. So you need to dedicate a portion of your QA team to be performing QA testing on the Monster Hunter Wilds beta version. And then you have another portion of your QA team QA testing the final version of the game to do optimization there. So as you can imagine, splitting up resources like this is something that is completely unoptimal, okay? That's why I'm trying to, like, make sure that people understand what exactly is happening with a beta like this. Does this mean that the final game is going to be perfect? Is that what I'm saying? Am I saying that, like, oh, are you going to say that the final version of the game is going to be perfect? No. I mean, I don't know. But I am telling you from all the research that I have done how this development process works. And so when you have a beta that is going to receive way less optimization than a final version of the game, which is only going to receive optimization to begin with in the final stages of development, you shouldn't really expect to get flawless performance out of a budget GPU. Even the higher GPUs are going to basically be brute forcing through optimization issues to try and get good frame rate. And yet what I have seen from the community is most people treating this as the final game, which I don't think is reasonable. But anyway, as I got involved in this discourse of the 3060 and whatnot, and it seemed like a lot of people were expecting a 3060 GPU to be able to play this game flawlessly at 1440p 60 FPS max settings, and I said, I don't think this is reasonable. And then a lot of people started saying, well, the game is downright unplayable in my 3060. And it's like, okay, well, in that case, let me go ahead and do a test. And the test that I did is I have a streaming computer, because the way that streaming works, especially when you have hardware that is not top-notch and not NVIDIA, you're going to, one of the things that you want to have, if possible, is have a 2-PC setup, because then you're offloading all of the processing capabilities and all of the GPU capabilities of live streaming onto another computer, which means that your main computer is never affected by the fact that you are live streaming, which gives you a lot of, it allows you to have less powerful hardware, and it's a little bit more cost effective. I know, look, I'm not rich. I'm not out here making the big YouTube bucks like everybody thinks. So whenever I'm buying a GPU, guess what? I'm pinching pennies, okay? So this is why I have a 6900 XT instead of a 4080, okay? Anyway, continuing onwards. So I grabbed my streaming PC, which is way weaker. We're talking about an i7 5930K at 3.5 gigahertz, an RTX 2060 at 6 gigabytes of VRAM, 32 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM at 2133 megahertz, and a Kingston A400 SSD. So it's not even an NVMe drive, it's just a regular SSD. But that didn't really seem to have that much of an impact from my experience. However, obviously playing it on a 2060, what I was expecting is like, this isn't even gonna run, because of what people were telling me on Twitter, right? People were telling me like, this is completely unplayable on my 3060, here's my CPU, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right, this is not even gonna run on the 2060, but it's the final day of the beta, so let's just have a fun experiment and see what it works, what it's looking like. And for starters, when I first booted it up, it took 30 minutes, it was over 30 minutes to do the shader compilation. Like, I was doing other stuff on the computer, and I was just like going on the background in the streaming room. I was like, huh, you're still compiling shaders, huh? Take your time, buddy, take your time. So after it eventually compiled the shaders, I jumped into the game and I was like, huh, it's not nearly as bad as people were making it out to be. People were telling me like sub 20 FPS. And I was like, oh, the game is running at 30 FPS at 1080p. Okay, so I tweaked the settings a little bit to see what I could get, obviously lowering shadows, that type of stuff. I actually raised some of the settings because apparently whenever I went for the lowest mesh quality, I got the Dorito monsters. I'm sure you guys have heard about those, the polygon monsters. People were telling me, hey, have you seen the Nintendo 64 version of the Monster Hunter Wilds beta? And I was like, oh, damn, that's interesting. But, I got it to run. And it was running, and I was like, this is actually very playable. So I recorded a hunt of me hunting Radeon with the Charge Blade, because Charge Blade is considered to be one of the most technical weapons by the Monster Hunter community, and therefore it is a weapon that requires quite a bit of timing if you want to do guard points, and requires time button inputs if you want to do like Savage Axe, and if you want to do other stuff. So I was like, okay, this will be a good test. If I'm able to kill Radeon using a Charge Blade, in a decent way, then that would prove that, yeah, you can run this on lower hardware if you want to. You just have to make concessions because it is lower hardware. So the processor on this computer, like I told you, the i7 5930K, this is a 10-year-old processor. The RTX 2060 is a budget GPU on a series that was widely criticized by people, the 20 series, as in a lot of people never even bought a 20 series GPU because it was that bad performance-wise. It was not that big of a leap in performance, so a lot of people leaped from the 10 series to the 30 series and completely ignored the 20 series because it was terrible. Just to give you guys an idea of the hardware we're working with, and the performance that you guys are watching in the background is what I was getting. So to me, I was like, I mean, you guys are complaining, and again, this is a beta. and you guys are complaining about this, this is not, I don't think this is that big of a deal. I think it is very important to provide accurate feedback, because otherwise, if everybody's just screaming, "Ah, it was unplayable on my system," okay, great. What exactly are they going to be doing with that information? You need to be more specific. What do you mean it was unplayable? What was the frame rate that you were getting? What's the speed on your RAM? What CPU do you have? All of that stuff. And if you guys want to leave your experience in the comment section down below, feel free to do so. I don't know if anybody from Capcom is going to end up watching this video or not, but just in case they do, they might benefit from more information. But be accurate. Like, hyperbole and exaggeration is not going to help anybody. Like, I saw somebody arguing that they believe they should be able to run the game at 1060, 1080, on their 1060 at 1080p 60 FPS flawless. And I was like, no, I'm sorry. That's not reasonable. That GPU is 8 years old. You're crazy. I'm sorry, bro. Like, it's just not reasonable. This is a beta. And that is the main point that I would like to make. This is a beta, and I want you to understand what the purpose of this beta was. The purpose of this beta was not to optimize this game to run optimally on every single system, despite the fact that, like I've mentioned, it was running significantly better than the version that I've played at Gamescom 2 months prior, and that was with just 2 months of a little bit of touch-ups on this to get it running as a public demo, to iron out crashes, figure out all of that stuff, and to just get it running. As in my opinion, and again, this is not information that they've told me, this is information that I'm inferring based on my experience with this beta. My opinion is that the purpose of this beta was to test network infrastructure. So they weren't trying to optimize it to run flawlessly on every system, quite the opposite. They were trying to optimize it to run on as many systems as possible, which I would argue they did a good job, because apparently there were people playing this game on 1050s. I mean, that was barely playable, but they were, they were able to log in and they were able to test the network infrastructure, which is what Capcom wanted. They wanted to get as many people logged into the servers because they were testing the server load. That was, in my opinion, the main purpose of this beta. But naturally, when you do something like that and the game isn't properly optimized yet, and a lot of people are looking at this beta as a demo to use as a purchasing decision, you're going to eventually get a situation where people are going to start comparing this to the launch of Dragon's Dogma 2, which obviously had some serious performance issues. And this is already established in Capcom's track record at this point, that RE Engine is apparently supposed to struggle with open world games, and that is kind of the purpose of Monster Hunter Wilds. It is a much more almost open world. It's not a traditional open world game, but you guys get the point. It's going to have a massive sprawling landscape where you're going to be hunting monsters. And when you have a situation like that, people are going to start drawing parallels. Like, oh, it's just like Dragon's Dogma 2 all over again. Look at all these performance hiccups and all of that stuff. But I would reinforce again, the purpose of this beta was to get it running on as many systems as possible to stress test the network infrastructure. And from that perspective, the beta was an absolute success. And why do I say this? It is because, for those of you that aren't aware, whenever a new MMO comes out, because I understand not everybody plays MMO, so you might not be familiar with this, but whenever a new MMO or a new live service game comes out, usually what happens is a bunch of people slam into the servers and the login servers explode and nobody can play the game. You get situations where you're getting queues to jump into the game. You get situations where, the company straight up has to take the servers down because stuff becomes unplayable and, cache problems and servers explode, fires in the friggin' back room where all the servers are at and all of that stuff, the data centers, etc., etc. And that is usually a very common experience whenever you are dealing with this. And the reason I bring this up is because, in case you guys didn't notice, in order to play the beta, you are logging into a server. The beta was always online. And that's not to say that the final version of the game is going to be always online, because it's not. You're going to be able to play the game completely offline. But their purpose of this beta was to test that network infrastructure. So everybody that got to play the beta, you went through an online server, which pretty much acts like the login server of an MMORPG. These are those servers that I told you that 9 times out of 10, when a new MMORPG launches, they explode. And people aren't able to play the game, and they get stuck in queues and all of that stuff. Did you get into a queue when you were trying to play the beta for Monster Hunter Wilds? No, you didn't. Did you get disconnected from time to time? Absolutely. But were you able to connect immediately after? Yes, you were. Unless you had other internet problems, of course. But that was my experience, and that was the experience that I've heard reported from most people. They were able to connect, they were able to play, the beta never went down. You know, during the periods that the beta was supposed to be up, it never really went down. Again, there were disconnects, there were instabilities, there were all this stuff, because their server team was testing all of this in the background. And I would like to remind you that when the PC version went live, because, you know, first we had the PlayStation only version, so that was like, you know, people played it on PlayStation, and PlayStation is only just a PlayStation users, which is probably still a considerable amount of people, but I don't really have the numbers for that. But once we had the numbers on Steam, we reached 463,000 concurrent users on Steam alone. So then you also have God knows how many other hundreds of thousands of people playing on the PlayStation and on Xbox, which were also slamming those same servers. Because, again, I would like to remind you, this is a cross-play game. So everybody is slamming the same servers, the same login servers, the same lobby servers, everybody's slamming on those. So I would imagine that we did well above 500,000 players concurrently slamming the servers. And the servers didn't buckle under the weight. And that was precisely the point of this beta. So from my view, that was a success. Performance-wise, the performance wasn't great, but like I told you, the optimization that they're doing on the final version of the game is not going to be reflected on this beta according to the information that I looked up, according to the Sakurai video, all of that stuff. For all intents and purposes, the main branch of development and this beta are two different games. Now, like I said, this does cause a problem. And how can Capcom solve this problem? This was actually something that I was talking with Gaijin Hunter today on the Third Fleet podcast. How can Capcom solve this problem that they've created for themselves where people are going to associate the Monster Hunter Wilds beta experience with the final version of the game? The only way to fix this is to release a benchmark tool for the final version of the game, which again is going to involve more development time and all of that stuff, but something like what we had for the engine update of Final Fantasy XIV. I'm not sure if you guys were aware, Final Fantasy XIV received a major engine update, and in order to figure out if users were still able to play the game properly, they put out a benchmark tool that allowed you to benchmark the game, and it would show you certain portions of the game that would cause a lot of stress on your GPU and on your CPU and all of that stuff, and it would test it out, and that way people will be able to test their hardware to figure out whether or not the game runs at an acceptable level on their hardware. You know, you could also just release a demo, but that implies more development time taken away from the main branch of development and more development time placed on, just polishing up this demo that we have, this beta that we have right now in order to polish it to really be closer to the final version, which I don't think is a good use of time. In my opinion, the best thing to do for Capcom is release a benchmark tool, and that will allow people to test for themselves how the final version of the game is going to run on their hardware. But anyways, those are my thoughts. Do I believe that the game is going to run better than what we got on the beta? Yes, I believe that. You may think that like, oh, you're just, you're way too optimistic. Okay, that's fine. I have faith in the Monster Hunter team. I'm sorry that you don't. But I believe the game's going to run better. Am I going to tell you, go pre-order it right now? No. I'm going to hope that Capcom puts out some type of, a benchmark tool. And if they don't, I'm going to tell you to wait until you see what the performance of the final version of the game is like, especially if you had problems running the Monster Hunter Wilds beta. But that is my conclusion of all the time that I spent on the beta. Now I want to make videos talking about actual gameplay and cool stuff that I did on the beta, which is way more fun than talking about the performance of an unfinished version of a video game that everybody is obsessing over. And I understand why you're obsessing over it, but I just don't think it's fair to be like, it's all doom and gloom for now because the beta didn't run flawlessly on my 1060. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification icon, all that jazz, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.